I would like to recognize Mr. Gosar for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since January 2021, the Biden administration has implemented an executive order that works to appease special interests at the cost of the American taxpayer. The FAR Council rule mandating PLAs, which is the subject of today's hearing, is another example of Biden's prioritizing special interests. This inflationary policy will increase costs for all Americans and provide them less in return. Mr. Brubeck, can you tell me what this could cost the American taxpayer if it was enforced for every project over $35 million?
The FAR Council final rule suggests it could be $14 to $16 billion worth of construction contracts subject to this rule. We think it's probably going to be a little bit more than that. The question then becomes how many of these projects have PLAs required on them? It seems like all of them will, unless the exception process changes. And then the next question is, what is the cost increase as a result of the project labor agreement reducing competition? Research suggests it's 12% to 18%, but it might be much greater or much less depending on the marketplace and variety of factors. So we don't really know yet, but it's going to be a lot.
Now, ABC members have billed 50% of the value of large-scale federal construction contracts over the last 15 years. Will federal agencies be able to rely on ABC members to support the warfighter, defend our borders, and improve our infrastructure at a costly, if this costly rule remains in effect?
I don't believe so. I've been hearing from both procurement officers and our own members saying they're going to not work on federal contracts anymore. I don't know where those federal contractors or where the labor is going to come from to be able to deliver those services that our government and our warfighters need.
Now, are the manufacturers of the fab chips, this is really important to Arizona and other states, but funded by the $50 billion in CHIPS and Science Act, required to mandate PLAs, or are they being strongly pushed to require them?
They are not being required to do so, but our understanding after talking to a number of the chips manufacturers, construction folks, is that the Biden administration is really doing some arm twisting behind the scenes to push them to sign PLAs. So far, some of the awardees of the CHIPS money have signed PLAs, some have resisted, and some who have resisted have been the subject of pretty intense campaigns from union organizers trying to make sure that they sign a PLA on future work.
So how's that going to affect the semiconductor business?
Well, the good news is that it's not a requirement. The bad news is that there's a lot of coercion behind the scenes. And if you look at foreign investment in this country related to CHIPS fabs, I think they're having a hard time understanding how to operate under these types of environments.
Now, the Obama administration did not mandate these, right?
That they had an executive order in place that strongly encouraged on a case-by-case project labor agreements, but they were not mandatory across the board like this policy. Is a big distinction between the two.
So let's walk back through this. I thought I heard the comment that some of these PLAs are actually more cost-effective. So, you know, being in the construction industry prior to this, I don't see how that works. Can you walk me through it where I could actually get a PLA will actually be more cost-effective than what you do?
So we've seen examples of projects bid with and without PLAs, federal contracts under the Obama administration. There was a great example in New Hampshire where a project was initially bid with a PLA requirement, and then it was bid without, and we saw the bid numbers. And what we found was that there were nine bidders instead of 3 when the PLA was removed, and the costs were 16% less. And so what you got there was less competition in that situation, and that's because contractors are limited on the number of bids that they can submit on this issue. They have fewer subcontractors that can participate that might be willing to sign the PLA. They've got union work rules that increase the cost of construction, make them less efficient. They've got to pay in the pension of union benefit plans. A lot of reasons why these increase the cost of construction, especially when they're mandated. In a voluntary nature where you might enter into one because it might streamline your collective bargaining agreements, there may be some cost savings related to overtime or holidays, but that is not what we're talking about today. We're talking about when the government's requiring project labor agreements in that case.
So let me ask you another question. Do you coerce your employees as to who to vote for in an election?
No.
Would you see that as a complication of this PLA?
I'm not sure.
Could it be?
It could be.
When you join a union, do you turn over your rights in many cases? And I'll retract that because there's a better way to ask that. Are there other influencing factors in regards to joining a union and involving in a PLA?
Well, there's a number of situations where private developers can't get permits. Like, for example, in California, there's something called green mail, where the construction trade unions are seeking a PLA on a project. They'll file a number of frivolous environmental complaints to stop a project from moving forward without a project labor agreement. There's a number of tactics that are used to extract PLAs from the private sector. And then, of course, we're seeing the government side as well.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. I'd now like to recognize Mr. Grothman for 5 minutes.
Sure, thank you. I'd like to apologize, although sometimes members of the other party, they get so used to